you introduce yourself? All right, we're recording.
Gary and Janet Reber, we've been here about 5 years. For some reason, I don't have video.
Okay, B, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, I'm Bee Verzok and my partner is Marv Leek, and we have been in this area for 20 years plus another 27 where his parents lived here off of Horn.
Thank you, Daniel. Dan?
Did you say Jan or Dan?
Dan.
Hi, I'm Dan Isaacson. I've been a part of the River Road community for almost 2 years now, but resident Eugene off and on for almost 20.
Okay. Ian, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Ian Apau. I live over on Anderson Lane. You might recognize my house by the two little wiener dogs that hang out front in the front window. That is our claim to fame on the block. And I really enjoy trees and interested to hear what everyone here is thinking about them in this neighborhood.
Thank you. Joshua, I don't think we've had you introduce yourself.
Yeah, hi, Joshua Keelis. Been in the neighborhood for 4-ish years, and I'm a member of the board.
Thank you. At this point, if there's anyone left, I apologize for not noting you, but would you introduce yourself? Jan?
Hi, I'm Candace.
Okay,
Hello.
sorry. Go ahead. Candace.
I'm Candace. Yep, that's me. I've been in the neighborhood 14 years at a few different locations. Yeah, I'm down on Mariu now, so.
Thank you. How about Jan now? Jan Spencer.
I've already introduced myself, John.
Okay, my bad. So
Charles
has
C.
everyone else? Charles C., thank you.
I've already introduced myself as well.
Okay, is there anybody left? Okay, let's move on. Announcements. Jan.
I want to announce that I have a podcast that I actually made a couple of years ago for my radio show, and I haven't mentioned it at any of our RRCO meetings because I think a lot of people in RRCO would be interested. It's the history of permaculture in River Road. It's a 1-hour podcast, and I just put the URL into the chat, and I also titled the name of the podcast, which is History of Permaculture in River Road. It's really good. It's a conversation with Robbie Logan because we've collaborated a lot over the years in regard to permaculture and River Road. We cover a lot of time and space, and I think people would be really interested. A lot's happened here that most people don't know about that I think people would like to know about because we do have a substantial amount of permaculture here in the neighborhood. So it's in the chat.
Thank you, Jan. And I'll repeat Dwight's request if anybody has shown up late. Please enter your name into the chat, especially if you're a River Road neighbor. That's our official roster, and that's important when it comes time to vote because you have to have attended a prior meeting, and this is how we check. Thank you. Other announcements? Well, I have one, and that is that I have learned that the Eugene Planning Commission is going to take up looking at the Willamette Greenway ordinance for the purposes of making it clear and objective. So we finally have our opportunity to invigorate our Greenway Ordinance Committee and start hopefully working with the Planning Commission to make the ordinance what we need it to be. So stay tuned for that. Other announcements? Okay, let's move on. Eric, I will turn it over to you and Ian. And when you're ready for Q&A, I'll be happy to manage the queue, but you're on.
Excellent. I will bring up my PowerPoint here quickly and we'll go from there. Thank you very much for having me tonight.
And I didn't introduce you, so please introduce yourself. I apologize.
Oh, no problem. Okay. Can everybody see my screen okay?
Yes.
Oops. 1 second. There we go. Okay, sorry about that. Yeah, so my name is Eric DeBoard, and I'm the Urban Forestry Supervisor for the City of Eugene. Very excited to be here tonight. And yeah, I just want to talk a little bit about our program, what we do, what are some of the challenges we face, and then we can open it up for question and answer. And Ian is going to join in this talk as well. And we spoke earlier, so I think I'll go first, go through my presentation, and then he'll join in at the end. But it's fairly informal, so I'm not too concerned. If you want to interrupt me for questions, that's fine. But that will also make sure we have some time at the end. All right, so I'll just jump right in. Our urban forestry program is really consisted of 8 team members at the moment. We're actually down 2 vacant positions. But essentially we have 3 field staff, 3 technicians, a management analyst, and myself as the supervisor. We also have a contract crew that works with us pretty much daily. That essentially functions as an extra crew. We have the 2 positions that we have vacant are actually field positions, and we're really excited to get those filled because we're very short in that regard. The services that we provide are, of course, tree pruning, removal, planting, but we also handle all the permitting and planning for street trees, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in just a little bit. We also have vegetation management in urban forestry, which is really it's a code enforcement position that essentially keeps all nuisance vegetation out of the right of way, and that could be in terms of ivy growing over a sidewalk, a hazardous tree that might affect the right of way, things like that. So it encompasses more than just trees. Right now we're maintaining somewhere around 100,000 street trees. We have about 86,000 identified in our inventory, and we know that we have quite a few more trees than that have not been inventoried yet, but they tend to be in places like, say, Fox Hollow Road or maybe Dillard Road, where you have more of a forested setting where we don't really look at those trees individually necessarily. So when I say 100,000 trees, or even that more accurate 86,000 trees, those really are street trees in the right of way, and most traditionally are going to be located between the sidewalk and the street in that grass strip. Certainly the vast majority of the urban forest is on private property, and that's largely unregulated here in Eugene, as opposed to other cities like, say, Portland would be a great example. So they actually regulate trees on private property more from a permitting standpoint, whereas in Eugene, the only time that we really regulate private trees is in times of new development, when the lot is vacant and maybe it was a forested lot that they want to build houses or whatever on. Then we do have some involvement in that permit piece of it. And our yearly budget is around $2 million. The return on investment is really about $5 million per year. And when we factor that everything into that, it's going to include things like stormwater benefits, just a myriad of benefits that the city of Eugene receives. So it's actually one of the few pieces of infrastructure that you can actually invest in that is going to appreciate with time, provided that you're maintaining the urban forest well. Codes and regulations. This is something that I want to talk a little bit about, but it really isn't the focus of my presentation tonight at all. But largely, Chapter 6 and Chapter 7 of City of Eugene Code is what regulates trees. And all that can be found, of course, online. I didn't put in here, but there is some tree regulation that occurs in Chapter 9 as well. If folks are looking for some really dry reading, that's an excellent source right there. And tree stuff is kind of scattered amongst those codes. So you really have to read through it to understand it, but it is available if you'd like to look at it. And really what that does is it requires things like permits for tree planting, permits for tree removal. Really, it sets the framework for how we manage the urban forest. So it does talk a lot. Pardon me, I pulled my cord out. So it does set criteria for tree protection during construction. And it does, when we get into an enforcement action, if somebody say illegally or unpermittedly removes a street tree, it does allow us to recuperate the cost if someone were to remove a tree, or more commonly during construction projects, if a city tree needs to be removed to facilitate that project, we can actually recuperate the appraised value of that tree and actually reinvest that into our urban forest. So that's one of the nice things in Eugene City Code that has allowed us to recuperate the loss when we have a tree come down for construction purposes. And then it of course guides the best management practices. We conform to ANSI standards for pruning. There's a whole myriad of agencies out there that put out best management practices, and code kind of spells out what we need to follow. So the big focus, this evening is going to be tree planting, and there's a couple ways that happens in Eugene. Friends of Trees is one of our bigger tree planters that we have here, and they largely, as Eric will talk about in the next segment, they largely work on residential and commercial sites that are largely infill, and that happens through a community enhancement contract that we have with Friends of Trees. We also have our contractor that I mentioned earlier. Mostly we utilize them for tree planting in new subdivisions and of course engineering projects. We also have our in-house staff, and we tend to focus on infill planting. We do have a small nursery that we grow trees for, but we also purchase trees as well. So we have a couple methods there. But really what we try to focus on as an organization is to plant trees that are in tough sites. So watering is going to be one of the big things that you have to contend with once you start planting trees. We water trees for 3 years as part of their establishment. So, with the Friends of Trees model, a lot of times the adjacent homeowner would water the trees, but as you can imagine, there's a ton of sites in Eugene where there's not an adjacent homeowner. That could be an apartment complex, it could be an industrial area. And folks just are not, as generally speaking, not as invested if there's not somebody living directly next to that tree. So we really need to make sure that we're focusing on those areas. We do have a water truck and a water truck driver that works pretty much the entire summer just watering trees. So that's what we like to focus on. And then of course, individuals are certainly welcome to get planting permits. Those are free permits that we offer. And really what it does is just ensures that we've got the right tree in the right space. We traditionally have not done a great job of that in the past, and we have a lot of trees out there that are maybe not the best tree for the site. And so we really, this is a long-term investment over many years, and we just want to make sure that folks are getting a good tree for their site. We recently revised our approved street tree list. It has over 125 approved species, which is great. That's really comprehensive, and that does cover most of the cultivars. Anybody that's gone to a nursery to look at trees and let's say you wanted a dogwood, well, you realize very quickly that there's, multiple varieties. And we do encourage those as long as they kind of generally keep the basic characteristics of the tree. So we really have a great palette to plant from here in Eugene. And the other thing, we're in Western Oregon, which is the nursery capital of the United States. So we really do have good availability here in terms of quantity and selection. So that's one thing that Eugene really has going for it. We have trees for all sorts of sites. One of the nice things about this list is, again, your selection really comes down to your site. And so with the new list that's on our website, we actually have a filterable Excel spreadsheet that you can go through. You can just plug in your information, and out of those 125 trees, maybe only 20 or 30 would be good options for your site. Well, then you're not having to look through that entire list to find a tree. So we want to make it as user-friendly as possible for folks. We've included a planting guide and some other considerations that have not been in previous iterations of our list, such as drainage, drought resistance, things like that. We're again just trying to make sure that everybody has all the information that they need to make a good choice, because it is a very long-term investment. We just like anybody else, we're facing all sorts of threats and challenges, especially these days, it seems like. But it's not all bad news, and we do quantify the benefits of the urban forest through canopy cover. And in the past, we've kind of focused on number of trees, and we're realizing that's really not a very good metric. So the newer standard would be urban canopy cover, and that is essentially when you look down from a bird's eye view, how much of the city is actually covered by foliage. And we're finding that that's a really a good metric to use, and that's again becoming the standard. It definitely is going to encompass all of the benefits. So we don't want to just focus on one or two things. There's social economic considerations, environmental considerations. There's all sorts of things that we want to capture, and this allows us to do that a little bit better. We know that we're losing canopy cover fairly quickly, and in some parts of town, it's up to 1% per year, which is fairly alarming. Eugene did not start out with a great canopy cover to begin with. We're actually at about 22% right now, which is considerably below the national average. And a lot of folks are really surprised to hear that. But when you compare that with something like Atlanta, who has a 60% overall canopy coverage, we're certainly lacking. So we want to correct that. A big piece of this, though, is that about 75% of the urban forest is on private property, and we really only have influence there at best. We don't have any authority. So really one of our roles in this is to promote the benefits of trees, and then also try to find ways to bring the cost of tree planting down. So that's something we're hoping to do as well. The biggest drivers for our canopy cover loss really are development. In Eugene right now, we're experiencing a lot of infill development. You're noticing that the town is densifying, and that's a good thing, but we need to be really careful about how we manage this growth that we're having, because competition for trees, just competition for space in general in Eugene is becoming pretty fierce. And unfortunately, trees tend to be a last consideration for a lot of folks. So that's something we want to turn around for sure. We're also seeing, a lot of mortality. I think anybody who's driven through the South Hills has seen all the Doug fir that are starting to die. And as we are also experiencing these more frequent storms that are greater in intensity, we're losing a lot of trees that way as well. And that just happens, anybody that was here in 2019 saw that. I mean, we lost thousands of trees, really in the period of just a couple of days. So things like that make a really big impact. And then, of course, one of the other big barriers is just cost. It's not cheap to plant trees. Kind of on the high end for us, we're paying about $475 for a tree to be planted and watered for 3 years with a warranty. So you can see where the cost can really add up. There are ways to bring that cost down, but if that's kind of worst case scenario, and once you multiply that 475 times the numbers that we're talking about, it gets pretty staggering. So we want to try to focus on bringing that cost down. As I mentioned before, there is some really good news that's happening here. City again recently adopted the Climate Action Plan 2.0, and that actually has some very specific actions for our group to take. We have some new tools, and I'll show some of these later that are actually available now that will allow us to better understand our canopy loss and really the status of the urban forest. People are becoming more aware of the benefits of trees. There's a lot of research that's happened over the last 20 years, and we're kind of realizing all the benefits of that now. So it's an exciting time to be working with trees for sure. Let's see, trees play a big role in other social issues. I've already talked on that a little bit. But really the big thing here, and this sounds kind of insensitive, but trees are finally being recognized as infrastructure. People think of infrastructure, they think of streetlights and fire hydrants and those sorts of things. But really, once we say that, yes, trees are a critical piece of what's called a complete street, it changes how people look at them. Trees have value. As I mentioned before, we can actually recuperate appraised value. And to some folks, they've never heard of that before. They don't realize the value of a tree. And a mature tree can be appraised at $20,000 or $30,000 fairly easily. So it's good to finally see trees being looked at as critical infrastructure. That's really a positive thing for us. Yeah, we do have a great foundation to build on. As I mentioned earlier, we started at a lower canopy coverage percentage than I would have liked to have seen, but we do have some amazing trees in town. I mean, as far as specimen quality trees, I always tell folks, we have street trees in Eugene that in some cities would really be considered like arboretum quality trees. We really have some just beautiful specimens here. So it's not like we're starting from a bad place. We just want to continue to make things better. So I mentioned we have these various actions that are in our climate action plan. And one of those is to increase our urban tree canopy coverage to 30%. And that's really kind of considered a bare bones, it's a minimum average. A lot of folks or a lot of cities these days are shooting for more like 40%. Given the fact that we're already starting off below considerably, we're going to shoot for 30% within the next 10 years. And that actually will make a huge impact. Tracking and maximizing ecosystem services. I'll show you some tools that we have for that. Our urban forestry management plan that we currently operate off of is actually 30 years old. That's kind of embarrassing to say, but I'm excited that'll be implemented this winter. We've got a good start on that. A 10-year pruning cycle is something we really have honed in on. And actually in 2020, we hit it for the first time ever. But essentially your pruning cycle is, imagine if you were to start on one end of town, you prune all the trees. How long does it take you to get to the finish line? When we really started quantifying, we realized that our pruning cycle was in excess of 20 or 30 years. It was pretty far out of best management practices. And we've made some changes to correct that. So that makes trees a lot more storm resilient and less prone to failure when we are taking good care of them. Essentially, they're safer. Establish a regional tree planting collaboration. That's something that we've already gotten a good start on. We did our 2021 for 2021, where we gave away over 2,000 sequoias, and actually the total number was, I believe, just over 3,000. So we exceeded our goal on that, and we'll continue those initiatives moving forward. And really to enhance the soil standards. And that's something I'm not going to get into great detail here, but one of the problems that we have is, especially during construction, the soil that winds up in the right of way a lot of times is full of concrete washout, gravel, all sorts of things that really shouldn't be there. And that really makes it difficult to establish trees. So that's something we know we need to improve. So this is our one of our new tools that we have is called Tree Plotter Canopy, and it's an urban tree canopy assessment tool. We've got it here for Eugene. This is just a kind of a quick snippet here, and I'm going to scroll down. I'm going to back up. Actually, as I mentioned before, what this represents right here is 22% canopy coverage. The darker green areas are more heavily forested, and the lighter, this kind of tan color here, is on the lower end of that spectrum. Now, when we zero in very specifically on the River Road Community Organization, we actually see that the average here is 24%. So that's already a good start, but we also realize that we've lost about 1% between 2011 and 2019. But this is a view that we've never been able to have before. We've done these calculations on a citywide level, but it's really amazing to be able to zero in on smaller units. And in fact, we can even get down to census blocks. So if you look, this is actually that same snippet. This is kind of the area that we're looking at, but we can actually get down to census blocks. So we can see even within this neighborhood where the more heavily or the least heavily treed areas are. So this is, from a management standpoint, this is a huge advancement. And we've only had this tool now for, I think we received it maybe 2 weeks ago. So we're really excited to start implementing this. But one of the other things that it's shown us is the urban heat island effect. Now we know that, concrete reflects heat, it reflects light. So heavily areas where it's mostly impervious concrete surface is going to be considerably hotter, and in some cases up to 20 degrees hotter than areas in the shade on hot days. So from a management standpoint, when I look at this this map here, the areas in red would be considered highly suitable or a higher priority area is another way to look at that. And when we zero in, you can see, some of the most red is, of course, just to the west of this neighborhood. And actually the hottest part of town is really the Highway 99 corridor, which is, very close to the west. So this is an area we want to focus in on, try to raise that canopy coverage, because folks in these areas are paying significantly more for heating and air conditioning, things like that other folks in more heavily forested areas are not having to do. So we really, from an equity standpoint, we want to see how the canopy coverage is distributed. And so again, this is something that really has not been available to us before. This map here is very similar. I'll kind of toggle between the two. You can see there's some subtle changes between the two, but this is also the tree equity score. Now, this is not something we're going to use very heavily for management, but it is another glimpse into what we've got. The tree equity score was actually designed by a group called American Forest, and it factors in all sorts of things from all sorts of different demographics, socioeconomic, environmental services, all sorts of things get factored into this. So you can once again see the areas where the canopy coverage is not as equitably distributed. And again, we want to zero in on that and try to turn that tide a little bit. And then of course we have our tree inventory, which gives us all the data that we've collected. All the data that goes into these green points is collected manually. So it's a huge task, but we do have, at this point, nearly every tree in Eugene is inventoried. But some of the other things that are, and the data that we get through this is the species, the size, the crown spread, maybe the adjacent home address, the condition that the tree is in. We can add photos. We can even upload PDFs. So risk assessments, whatever we want can go onto those green dots. And that's really our information that we have on each tree, historic photos, everything. When we look at this photo on the right, or this map on the right, it actually shows, I think everybody is well aware, once we get into River Road and Santa Clara area, the ownership between city and county is pretty checkered for sure. So these green streets in here show the city of Eugene owned streets that we actually do maintenance on. You can actually see it's certainly not the majority of the streets in this neighborhood. The majority of those would be, of course, maintained by the county. The other great thing that this tool allows us to see is the lot line and the right-of-way delineation. And what I mean by that is, how do we know if a tree is public or private? These gold lines that you see here denote property lines. Now, they're fairly accurate. They're not going to be down to the ½ inch, but they're for most of the business that we do, this is a great glimpse to actually have out in the field. We can see this on our iPads, and everybody on the crew has an iPad to collect all this data. So it's a fairly seamless system. But one of the things I want to point out, you can see the difference when you look at the photo on the left. You can see how this line it kind of jogs depending on the tax lot, and that's very common in the older neighborhoods in Eugene. And it's not just River Road and Santa Clara. We see this all over the place, as opposed to, you can see in these newer neighborhoods, it's a very grid style lot line setup. But you can imagine the confusion that it causes when the neighbor at this house who has very little right of way in front of their house, all these trees may be private, but yet one tax lot over, the tree that literally is just in line with those other trees may actually be a public tree. So really what I'm trying to illustrate here is that if you have any questions, please give us a call, or you can actually go onto our website and see the public facing version of this map, which has all the personal data extracted from it. This can actually tell you whether the tree in front of your house is public or private. And a lot of folks, worst case scenario, I've actually seen where sometimes these lot lines are literally 20 feet in, halfway through somebody's front yard. They're 20 feet in from the street, which can be very surprising for folks. So it's always good to kind of know where your property boundaries are. So I always point people to the either to our website or feel free to give Urban Forestry a call, and we can help you determine the ownership of the tree. I know I've spoken a lot here. I would maybe like to give it to Ian so that he can get his portion in, and maybe we can take some questions after that. Sorry, Ian, I think I went over a few minutes. I hope I didn't crowd you.
Oh, no, you're fine. It's totally fine. Before even we transition, is there anyone that has immediate questions for Eric before we lose our train of thought? I think there's a lot of information. I want to make sure that we don't lose anything there.
I had a question. I'm Charlesy. I've become a lot more aware of trees that are highly flammable and have made some rather poor choices. I am wondering if your 125 species was collected with that in mind.
I'll be honest, it was not. So, and we do have some trees on there that probably would fall into that category of being flammable. The first one that comes to mind, of course, would be the Oregon Bay laurel. Just because of its very oily, waxy leaf, I would expect that might be a more flammable tree than something like an oak tree during the summer months. So that is certainly in there. And no, that's actually not something that we considered.
is there a way in time of flagging those? I really think it's such a big investment.
Mhm.
And it's heartbreaking to have to remove a tree that you've fallen in love with because it's dangerous.
Sure. No, absolutely. Yeah, it's certainly something that we may need to consider, and we expect warmer, drier weather, so that is something that we may need to really take into consideration.
Mhm.
Yeah, I think that's a decent transition for me to step into. So thank you, Eric and Chelsea, for that. So again, my name is Ian Apau. I am a community development director for my consulting company. It's called Ecosystem Solutions. And not so long ago, I was working with Eric over at the city on a couple of those projects that he mentioned. And, I'm about 5, 6 years away from that now. And it's really interesting. When I started there, I was still in college and I was an environmental studies major. And historically, my education background was very focused on hard sciences. And then they stuck me in a basement for too long and I got too crammed and I wanted to go outside and play. So I decided to get out of chemistry and kind of see what the other factors were. And once I started connecting the dots and meeting folks, especially over in the urban forestry team over with the city, I was able to get a much broader understanding of what goes into infrastructures and planning and development of things like this. I grew up and I'm from New Jersey, the actual opposite of here. So in terms of all this, it was very much a shock to me, but I think that's what made me appreciate it so much when I came here. And, I've been living here for about 8 years now. And there's so many little microclimates and cultures inside an already fairly small town. And it's getting big quickly. There's a lot of infill, there's a lot of people coming in, there's a lot of different asks, there's a lot of different factors. I mean, this small town is really being pulled and really challenged to grow and to be different and to adapt. And I think really with any realm of life, we're really told that we have to feel one way or have an opinion this way or that way. And with trees, I just found this moment of clarity that let's look at it in a way where if I'm not loving of trees from a very spiritual place, I just like them because maybe they're profitable. Maybe they don't mean that much to me. So what would be something that someone who is working with trees, trying to advocate for their health, be able to say? And I was really focused on that question. What is the right language? And then I thought and started correlating, and I was giving a presentation with one of Eric's colleagues over at the city to a group of first graders in town. And we had this setup where we said to these first graders, here's one part of town, here's another part of town. We didn't give them street names or anything. We just showed them, this McDonald's over on West 11th. And then we showed them a really fun playground in the middle of Friendly. And we said, where would you rather live? And I've done that presentation 7 times, and there isn't one kid that wanted to live in the more arid area. And there's a natural attraction for people. And then look into the psychology of it. And then you realize, okay, what is the difference here? We can look at the charts, we can look at the demographics, we can look at the data and say, maybe there's more residential income in one of these areas that are more forested. Is there a correlation? And then when you look at these canopy maps and the heat island indexes, it's almost exactly the same. And the reason is that there is a passive psychological phenomenon really with trees, where if it's there and it's been there, it represents and signifies a sense of security. It's been there for a long time. It's been a safe place. It has been able to survive for 20, 30, 60, 80, over 100 years. And instinctually, we click into a feeling of feeling safe. And that equates to our property values in these areas. It's really phenomenal. And the value that we get from looking into these really, really seemingly mundane topics to some people, but then also super, super analyzed and are super passionate by both Eric DeBoard and Eric Burke. I mean, I don't know 2 people that are more passionate about the work that they do and the subject that they do. And these people want to connect with you. They need to hear what you think, what you're thinking. they want to be there, but like we all are, we have certain amount of limitations, restrictions, what we can do. So it's really important for us to, as residents, citizens, to make sure that these people know when we appreciate seeing certain things, when things are special to us, when we don't like things, that gives them something to work with. And I think overall, that's going to help us move on to the adaptive community that we want to be.
Thank you, Ian. Maybe one or two quick questions for either Ian or Eric, but we are at the end of our time. So Dan, a quick question, please.
You're on mute. Mute.
Yeah, I haven't looked at the tree inventory possibility, so I don't know if these trees are part of the potential for planting in public places, but food trees, edible nuts like walnuts, chestnut, there's other types of nut trees that do well in Eugene. Perhaps not as street trees, but perhaps I know a lot of places in the Greenway and River Road, and confidentially, I've already planted a few. Find them if you can, but there's a great need to be planting more food trees on public places. And if people like RRCO sponsored some trees and we said we'd take care of them, it wouldn't cost the city anything.
Thank you, Jan. One more, anybody else? Okay, great. Claire?
Does your organization take care of trees on county property as well as city property?
We so outside of storms, generally speaking, no. Once storms hit, those lines really get blurred. We'll respond to just about anything. But during normal business hours, typically no. But one of the things that I think Eric Burke will touch on this, we do want to certainly extend our planting into this area for sure. And we could, I think maybe for the sake of time, we'll talk a little bit more about that later, but that's something we would like to look at.
Thank you.
Thank you, Eric. And let's go on to Eric.
All right, thanks a lot for having me. Thanks, Eric and Ian. Great presentation. It's really an honor to get to talk to y'all and to get to work with Eric and Ian at the city. Cities, I've been volunteering with trees around Eugene for more than 30 years, and I've never seen the city and its urban forestry program so impressive at the work they get done and so effective and at getting the most done with the least. So they're really doing great work now, and I'm very pleased. I want to talk just a little bit about Friends of Trees. I have a little bit of history. My very first memories as a human being are in River Road when I was back in 1969 in Merrill Court, when a lot of the area around there was still gravel roads. And my first memory is watching the neighborhood, the woman across the cul-de-sac from me try and kill dandelions with poison with some little device where you go ka-chunka, ka-chunka. And so that's my first memory in life in River Road. I also, recently was really pleased to be part of groups of River Road neighbors who are advocating for saving some of the beautiful Oregon white oak grove adjoining the elementary school. We advocated for saving some of the ones in the courtyards of the school that didn't work. The easternmost grove did survive, which is really great to see. And with some of the school kids there, we planted, I think, 7 or 8 young Oregon white oaks around there, and a neighbor who lives there has been watering them. So that's something that's really nice. Friends of Trees organizes volunteers. We engage volunteers to plant and care for city trees. We're a regional nonprofit that works in cities from Vancouver, Washington, here, and our little local branch works in Eugene and Springfield. And we've been here for about 10 years. And before that, we're Eugene Tree Foundation, kind of the culmination of different nonprofits that have worked in Eugene on trees over the years, starting when I started out in '86 with Friends of Eugene's Urban Forests, then Eugene Tree Commission came and went, Eugene Neighborhoods program came and went, all these different groups came and went, and still here trying to work on engaging volunteers. And really the long-term goal would be to build a culture of people who care about nature and trees and plants, and work to take care of them and have the skills and knowledge and passion to take care of them. We're at a time, my background's in anthropology, and we're at a time with the lowest level of skill and knowledge about plants and animals and animals and so many important things that we threw away, and now we're trying to relearn them. And it's going to take generations of building knowledge culturally to do that. And a big part of it for Friends of Trees at our volunteer events is kind of meeting people where they are. And many of our volunteers have never used a shovel before. Many really take a long time to learn how to water a tree and to learn how to water a tree. We're really trying to be facilitators and support folks as they learn and grow. And the goal is to have an urban forest that's taken care of by the people living there, and to, particularly as Eric mentioned, since the vast majority of our cities on the private side, and there's really not a lot of regulations on what happens there. And we want a really educated, skilled, knowledgeable, caring culture to take care of those trees. What the programs that Friends of Trees work on is our green space program, which is planting in usually undeveloped areas like parks, natural areas, roadsides. The closest ones to River Road that you would see are on Northwest Expressway. I think technically they're in River Road if the rail yard, the rail line is the division between Train Song. There's 8 plantings, I believe. We'll be doing our 9th planting this fall between the Northwest Expressway and the Union Pacific rail line. I think when we first started that back in the late 90s, I drove something like 6-7 miles out there, and there was only one tree between Northwest Expressway and the rail line. It was a locust out near Maxwell, I think. And the veterans homeless camp there at the Chambers Overpass is in the shade of a project we did with City of Eugene back in, I think, 99 or 2000. And then in the last 8 years, we've done a project every year planting what we call pods, little 6-foot circle that has a couple trees, 5 or 6 native shrubs. And then recently we're planting more and more plants that are good for human food and for pollinators. So things like camas, milkweed, and Douglas's spirea. That's our green space program. Our neighborhood trees program plants street and yard trees. And we have a summer inspector program where we check on every tree that gets planted twice each of the first 2 dry seasons with volunteers who follow a route, check on trees, and provide support and door hangers for new tree recipients on weeding, watering, mulching, and other things that might help them with trees. Just Saturday, we had one of our, probably going to have 7 events this year where volunteers are pruning young, recently planted trees in the public right-of-way. We were over in Jefferson West Side neighborhood last weekend, Bethel the one before that. And we also have work parties to care, weed, mulch, and take care of trees. We'll be having one next Monday with Coconut Bliss on the embankment of I-105, where we planted a bunch of trees. And we also have a lot of tree walks. I did a tree walk out in Bethel on Saturday and saw some amazing trees in Mangan Park out there. In terms of how Friends of Trees works with volunteers. This year, we're working with City of Eugene really closely on what we're calling a focused planting approach, where we're starting in a neighborhood park and we're trying to get as many trees. We've used something similar to Tree Plotter that Eric showed, the American Forestry Equity Score, to identify some of the areas that have high racial diversity, low income, and low canopy cover, and prioritize on getting trees into those underserved areas. We're chose 2 focused areas this year. Actually, probably we'll add another one, but they are about 8 blocks west of 99, both around Mangan Park and Gilbert Park. So a little north of Barger, and then just north of the Baxter Creosote factory, where I always get a whiff when I come over the Chambers overpass into your neck of the woods. And hopefully some more trees in that area will help catch a little bit of that. We're going to be having neighborhood volunteers are going door to door offering free street. This is the first time we'll be able to offer free yard trees also to people. And we're focusing on fruit trees, native trees, and shade trees in those areas. We really only have funding for our street trees through a combination of our contract with the city, individual donations, business donations, and grants, and our tree fees. For street and yard trees, we have tree fees that are $50 for street trees and $85 for yard trees. This is the first year we'll be offer 50 or 100% off, no questions asked, anyone with financial need for yard trees. And we've always offered that for street trees. We're hoping to expand the scholarship program to all areas if we can get funding for yard trees, which we're working on. We just got some funding today to expand that to Springfield low-income areas, which we're really excited about. We're really working on building our program in Springfield. We're going to have these days where we go door to door, offer trees to everyone. We had a tree walk on Saturday. We'll be having more in those areas to help build knowledge in those areas. And then the plantings, we're trying to plant more by foot and bike rather than with our truck teams. And we have one planting a year that's almost all bike, hauling our stuff with bike trailers. Okay, I see 3 minutes. I'm gonna wrap things up. We're also having our first tree giveaway this fall, where we're focusing on fruit trees, shade trees, and native trees. We'll be giving away 250 trees, and one Saturday in November. We haven't identified the day yet. Jan, great comment about nut trees. There's a lot to that. We don't have time to get into that yet, but it's super important. Nut trees are really important. We kind of get food trees into the public right away by emphasizing some of the trees on the approved street tree list that aren't considered food trees, but actually are, like dogwoods, golden rain tree, all the oaks, and many other trees that we emphasize both for their drought tolerance, climate resilience, and food benefits. Hawthorns, particularly ones that have large fruits. So really good point. And I have lots more that I could say, but I'm going to stop there.
So we do have a couple of minutes left. Are there any questions for Mr. Burke? Jan, a question, please.
Following up on the nut trees, perhaps some sort of informal working group. Eric mentioned the nut trees in the chat, and then we had some other comments. Maybe we can continue this discussion. Maybe there's already been discussions about nut trees, but this certainly seems like there's support and interest in the idea. I would like to be a part of that.
Yeah, I would too. I find it really interesting because when we advocate for trees, no matter what we do, people complain and attack whatever idea that you come up with. And for nut trees, one of the big things that people get riled up about is pollen, which, since hazelnuts are the most reactive, have the most reactive pollen on skin reactivity tests locally. But they produce their pollen in December, January when most people aren't outside and it's raining. So it's really not an issue. Walnuts are a legitimate issue for those people who get riled up about that. And because they have very, very high protein reactive pollen that unleashes in May when it really does affect people. I personally think that's a very small issue, and trees actually pick up and take more pollen out of the air than they actually put out. But we do have to address some of those things as we talk about this. Most nut trees are wind pollinated. So compared to most fruit trees are insect pollinated, so they don't have pollen issues. So that's one thing. The other thing is that most of our nut trees are too big for most of the public right-of-ways in Eugene. So as we mentioned before, there's very few public right-of-ways that are large enough to handle them, but there's more than a huge amount of our city. And one analysis I did showed almost 20% of the city is lawn. And so there's enormous potential for nut trees and many trees in our city.
Thank you. Thank
I
you,
see
Eric.
Louisa's hand is up.
Okay.
Hi,
Miss-
thanks. So I had a question about specifically the River Road neighborhood and the fact that we have non-street conforming designations where we're actually, our streets aren't wide enough to be considered streets. And I'm wondering what the right of way is between off-street parking rules in public areas. And so it's kind of that map question. And also for Eric Burke, we had talked in another call about the importance of right place when you're planting a tree so it doesn't become a problem quickly. And I'm wondering, when you're doing big tree giveaways, how education works to get people to know and feel confident that they can plant a tree in the right place and keep it alive.
Well, I'll just answer that last question and then let Eric address the former question. I have actually been an opponent of tree giveaways, and I had real reservations about the Sequoia giveaway, not from the main complaint, which is that sequoias will take over our city and we'll only see sequoias when we look out the window, which is ludicrous, but the right tree, right place piece to that. And having seen Arbor Day Foundation trees dying all over our city my whole life, and little trees this big that are planted in grass and then left alone. And again, I just really have to emphasize, many of you are really skilled horticulturalists and stuff. Most people have zero skills horticulturally or knowledge of plants and animals anymore. It's gone. It's really gone. And so it's really, really important, the question that you asked. We just happened to get this grant to do a tree giveaway. I didn't write it. And so we're trying to learn from the experience of Eric and their Sequoia giveaway, where they did a lot of educational outreach and really worked to get the trees in the right place, and to learn how to do that right. We have a tree care guide. We have a plant siting guide. We will have people available to answer all kinds of questions. We have phone support. We have email support. And we have videos. And so there's a whole ton of ways we're trying to provide support for trees getting to the right place. The last thing we want is people to take trees and put them in their backyard under a power line or too close to a foundation or something like that.
Thanks, Eric. Burke, Eric DeBoer, do you want to add anything?
I had posed a two-part question, my apologies.
Yeah, so to address the first part of the question, I know a lot of the streets that you're speaking of. I actually have a friend that lives on one where it's a very narrow street with a lot of right-of-way that has largely been used for parking. Areas like that, they're not great planting sites because you've got everything from automotive fluids that may have dripped there for many years, but really more importantly is the compaction that happens. And so those, we would obviously want to look at our highest quality planting sites first, because sites specifically like what you're talking about actually take quite a bit of prep work to even get a tree able to be grown in something like that. So we really have to, those types of planting areas, unless somebody very specifically wants trees in there, would probably be some of the last ones we would plant because we have so many available spaces. But when we start looking at right-of-way in Eugene, I mean, when we talk kind of excessive right-of-way, there's quite a bit. So we do have a lot of right-of-way areas that aren't being used for parking or any sort of commercial interest or anything that would be great planting sites. So I think that's where we would just focus our energy.
Claire, would it be a problem to pitch in one thing about the neighborhood plan while we're here? Thank you. So I'm also on for the last, gosh, how long has it been, Belcher? 4 years? 4 years into a 2-year plan for the River Road Santa Clara neighborhood plan. And this particular topic and how to increase canopy when we don't have a lot of public space that's not the greenway. But we have big yards. And so one of the questions we keep asking is, how do we support trees in private land? And how do we celebrate and honor the trees that are on private land in River Road? And so we've had some ideas around mapping those trees on private land, similar to the trees that are mapped on public land, and then starting sort of a campaign or an idea where we tell stories about those trees, like the story that Eric, was sharing earlier, knowing that locust that's nearby and this amazing sycamore that's down the street that I admire every time. And how can we map those, talk about those, and really promote them in a way that becomes sort of a neighborhood heritage tree program? And in my other hat, as a sustainability commissioner, we have an urban canopy subcommittee right now, where we're actually hoping to launch a heritage tree program for the city of Eugene. It's the only major city in Oregon that does not have one currently. And what a heritage tree program is really basically is the recognition of culturally and ecologically vital trees. So trees over a certain age, trees that are outstanding specimens of a species, things like that, and mapping those. And so there's some work that's being done with Urban Canopy around that to try to launch a heritage tree program. And I'm wondering if River Road would be interested in sort of piloting that, and how RRCO might be able to kind of get together around this work, and specifically that kind of celebration of the trees that are on private land and the riparian zones that we have so many places, which are private lands, but they're protected private lands. And they're also incredibly important riparian corridors that run zigzagging through River Road, which is a prime opportunity for placement of native species that provide habitat and food for critters and for us. So those are some of the ideas we've had with the River Road Santa Clara Neighborhood Plan and the Sustainability Commission, which I happen to be on both. So I'd love to talk to folks more about those things. Thanks for the time.
Thank you, Louisa. And I apologize, we could go on for much longer, I am sure, but the agenda requires us to move to our next subject. So Eric, Ian, and Eric, thank you all very much for coming tonight, and let's talk more.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Claire, I'm turning it over to you.
Okay, I'm going to introduce Ellen Rifkin from the Social Justice Committee, who's been collaborating with the Stand Up for Racial Justice branch in Eugene. And we have a proposal for you. How many, can you put a thumbs up if you had a chance to look at our draft letter and stuff that was sent out in the newsletter? Some of you don't have your cameras on, I can't see you, but I hope that there is some review of that first. So Ellen, you turn on your camera and your microphone, please. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you for the gift of your attention. Our goal is to start conversations in Eugene neighborhoods and mobilize support for the recommendations of the Ad Hoc Committee on Police Policy. We'll be asking you to sign our letter to the Eugene City Council and Police Department. After George Floyd's murder, and in the midst of a summer of local protest, the City Council voted to establish the Ad Hoc Committee that was in July 2020. Using the President's Task Force on 21st Century Policing and Campaign Zero's 10-point plan for policing reform as reference points, the Ad Hoc Committee was charged with looking at current police policy through the lens of these two documents and proposing changes to the council. Mayor Vinnis invited 10 organizations to each send 2 representatives to the committee. The organizations included Communities of Color, Community Indigenous Peoples Group, queer and transgender groups, people working with unhoused youth, the Police Commission, Civilian Review Board, and 4 appointees by the mayor. For 7 months, which included an extension requested from City Council, the ad hoc committee worked tirelessly. They studied national reform platforms. They studied Eugene police policy and practice. They listened to community members' testimony, introduced and debated 85 motions, and ultimately they approved 50 recommendations in 5 policy areas, which you will see in a minute. The 50 recommendations address police and city policies regarding use of force, hiring and training, civilian oversight, body-worn cameras, and independent investigation and prosecution. In a moment, we'll highlight some of the committee's recommendations. We pause here because this is where the responsibility shifts to us. The City Council disbanded the committee once it met its deadline, but as the mayor noted, the policies and attitudes that underpin white supremacy pervade every aspect of our society, and removing them will be long, patient, and difficult work.
In the weeks following the election, Trump and his inner circle would wage a high-pressure campaign.
Does someone have
Hello, Brad and Ryan and everybody. Bill, it's Rudy Giuliani.
At least 30 contacts between
Can someone
Trump and
mute?
Republican officials.
Yeah.
What's going on?
States,
Mute your phone,
Georgia,
your
Michigan,
system, please.
Pennsylvania, and Arizona.
This is the White House operator.
I was out to dinner with friends.
Let me figure this out. Thank you, whoever did that.
Are we good? Okay,
Brenda, you need to go back at least 1 slide.
I'm aware of where we are.
Okay, so here we are. Okay. The Social Justice Committee of River Road Community Organization has teamed with Surge to create this letter. As a first step, we are inviting you, our organization, to join others in signing this letter to the Eugene City Council and Police Department. So we highlight here these requests from our letter to the City Council. Advocate for adequate cahoots funding. Urge Eugene Police Department to make de-escalation skills normative. Restructure current systems to make policing accountable to civilian oversight. Implement procedural justice policies. And continue collaboration with Eugene communities of color whose experience and perspectives are necessary as we seek to make systemic changes in Eugene policing. As the Social Justice Committee of River Road Community Organization, we ask you to sign this letter to Eugene City Council and Police Department, asking them to do the immediate and long-term work of implementing the ad hoc committee's recommendations. We're asking you as citizens to stay engaged over the long haul toward making these changes. And any individual could pick 1 or more of these ways to stay engaged. Follow our city council's work on policing, follow the collective bargaining process with the police union, lobby for civilian oversight of police practices. That's super important. Advocate for engagement with communities of color whose perspective is needed for meaningful long-term change. And finally, talk about the values that you want public safety practices to reflect in our city. We thank you very much for your time and we welcome questions.
Okay. Brenda, are you, or Ellen, are you facilitating the questions? Or do you want me to do that?
Why don't you call on people?
Okay.
I
So
do want to say we're not experts on the ins and outs of it's a pretty complex system that we have now in policing. And it was challenging for the ad hoc committee as well, but we'll answer your questions as best we can.
So the objective of this conversation is really that we, just to recap a minute, the Social Justice Committee is wanting to support the initiative from the neighborhoods to let the city know that we support these recommendations that have been researched and proposed. So we're not rewriting the letter. We're saying, can we as an organization support this letter? And also, can we as an organization support the efforts that are happening to reach out and do education with other neighborhood associations?
Thanks, Claire.
Jolene. You're muted.
Jolene, you're muted. Jolene, you're muted.
I have to find my little picture to unmute, I think. Well, I would say as a member of the Social Justice Committee, I would like to speak in support of the letter, recognizing that it is an incredibly complicated issue, but I think many of us can appreciate the need for better funding for mental health and crisis response services in our community, which wouldn't necessarily require a police response. I think many of us could appreciate the importance of focusing on de-escalation techniques utilized by our police department, looking at the national scene, looking at instances where police force has just spiraled out of control, as well as locally when police use of force has spiraled out of control. And so I think this is a push in the right direction. This is the push that was requested by the city council and the mayor. And
you're frozen.
Not just something that's reflected in, it is something that's reflected in also federal and statewide legislation.
Okay, thank you, Jolene. Dan?
Thank you. I was wondering, I mean, I'm fine with the letter. I agree with most of those points and have a pretty deep connection to the issue that I try to balance. But one thing that struck me, I don't know if it was just boilerplate that we put in there or if you can shed a little color into how it was put into the letter, but the request to have de-escalation training. So in my other volunteer world, I'm the president of NAMI. We provide de-escalation training to the City of Eugene Police Department. 98% of Eugene police officers have gone through their de-escalation training. The only reason it's not 100% is that they have onboarding officers who have not been, have not graduated yet and gone through that process yet. So I don't know if that, like I said, was just boilerplate we just added so that we're in concert with other letters that are going out across different municipalities. But if we want the letter to be received by the police department, we might want to take
Thank you for raising that. Thank you for raising that point. The report of the committee, quite a few of the recommendations revolve around de-escalation in terms of strengthening the measures that already exist. One of them is it's asking for more rigorous community oversight over the trainings. Another one is to make like mastery of the skills of de-escalation part of the performance evaluations of police officers, making their mastery of those skills part of if somebody gets, promoted or not to a supervisory position. Another aspect of the report states that if there's a citizen complaint if there's a citizen complaint about a police encounter regarding excessive use of force, the police officer under this new policy, if it's implemented, would have to, they would have to say why they didn't use de-escalation as the first resort. What was unique about that situation, why de-escalation didn't work, or why it wasn't appropriate. So those are just some examples of the approach of the report to the question of de-escalation.
Clearly, this conversation.
I don't know if that answers your question.
We need to wrap up in the next couple minutes, and we wanted to take kind of a straw poll to see if the membership feels like we can go ahead with this initiative and outreach to other communities, and also if you're interested in a follow-up Zoom conversation that's not in our regular meeting time. So Harry, I see your hand.
Yeah, I'd put a comment in the chat, but in case anybody couldn't read that, I just have concerns about noticeable increases in crime and traffic incidents across the city lately. And I just would question whether this is the best time to be putting increased restrictions on local police. Our public safety on river roads are less responsive than many of our neighbors desire. And yeah, I feel like public safety is a hot topic that is slipping away, that our quality of life is not what it was 2 years ago. And
no doubt about it, Harry. I think the purpose of this is to increase the capacity to address the real issues. And and we're not really open for a long debate about it here, because that's not the purpose of the ask right now. I appreciate your perspective, though.
Thank you.
Okay, so Brenda.
I was just going to maybe say to Harry and everyone else, the point of the letter is to say to the city, we want you to follow the recommendations of the task force you created, and we're watching, we're paying attention.
Right. So can you use your reactions button at the bottom of your screen to give us a thumbs up, or if you support this letter? And then if you don't have a thumbs up, then we'll assume that you either neutral or you don't support it. 2, 3, 4.
People could put it in
5.
the chat. Could put it in the chat also.
Will somebody count the chat for me? I can't do both. 3, 6, 7, 8.
They disappear.
9.
A physical hand is just as good.
Yeah, well, it's hard to count. 10, 11. Okay. Oh, look, I can look at the participants list. That makes it easier.
Oh, then maybe redo the chat.
Keep them coming, folks. Okay, I don't see a majority of people voting, and that might just be because we're doing it in multiple methods. I see Charles's hand up.
Yeah, I also wanted to say the little reaction hand disappears.
Oh.
You're better off to vote like with your hand.
Yeah.
Okay, well.
May I suggest there's enough interest to bring this back?
Well, we want to, okay. Brenda and Ellen, do you feel like you have the information you need to move forward?
Yeah. So I would like to get the straw poll, because I think there is a majority here. Not that we can't keep talking about it, but we do want to push this letter out to other neighborhood associations, and so I would just like to get a vote of endorsement, basically, if we have that. And looks to me like maybe we do. So if we can tighten up this voting process and double check the count. Just everybody raise their hand who's in support.
Okay, everybody raise your hands when we say to put it down. And if you're not turn on your video. Okay.
If your video's not on and you put up the
3,
raise
4,
hand
5,
icon,
6,
the
7,
raise
8,
hand will
9,
stay
10,
on.
11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17. Thank you. 17. I don't see Becky, Candace, B, Margie, Jan, and Harry. Okay.
Hi, Claire, you could count my hand. I'm sorry, I don't know how to do it on this device.
Okay. I've got 15.
B just went there. B just added another one.
Okay. 15, 16.
Okay.
It's the majority.
Okay. Thanks. I think the next time we take a straw poll, we'll make a little online survey instead of raising hands.
I just made it for you if you want to use it.
Oh, well, that's kind of you. I think we're past it at the moment.
Next
Okay.
time we go.
So back to you, John.
So we've got 5 minutes left, which is probably enough time for the two announcements I want to make, or we want to make. I'll go first and then I'll turn it over to Dwight. My announcement is about the easement at 785 River Road. For those of you who may not be aware, that's right across from the street light, the traffic light at Park. And there is an existing easement through that property, which has been used for many years, but currently is set up for the townhouses that are there that should allow us to access the bike path through the street behind. But the owners have decided, apparently sometime around November last year, that they didn't want that easement to be open, even though they don't have that authority. So they closed it, they closed the gate, they locked it. So when we became aware, we had a meeting with the neighbors. We made it very clear that that's what we wanted to have. We wanted to have it reopened. We asked the city to enforce the easement, and they sent a letter to the owners in August telling them that they had until September 7th to open the gate or they would remove it. September 7th is come and gone, but unfortunately the person in charge for the city was on vacation for a week, so nothing has happened yet. However, I can report to you that he has asked the code enforcement folks to remove the gate. They're having a meeting tomorrow to figure out how they can do this because they've never had to do it before. But my hope is that within the near future, that gate will be removed and we will have our legal access back again. So we don't have an answer yet. We don't have success yet, but we aren't giving up. White, do you want to talk about 151 River Avenue and where that went?
151 River Avenue is currently still under consideration, but not immediately.
For microsites.
For a safe sleep site.
Okay.
The city was considering 151 River Avenue for a safe sleep site, which would consist of a combination of pallet shelters, motorhomes, and tents. However, that is now off the table because they're focusing on two sites, one on Centennial, I believe at Chase Gardens, and the other one at Second and Garfield, to have those up and running sooner. John and I have been meeting with Peter Chavanas, Sarai Johnson, Reagan Witchus, and James Ewell in regards to that project. James updated me on the project at the south end of the neighborhood at Chambers and Northwest Expressway. That project is currently on hold for two reasons. One, lack of funding, and the person that would oversee that site stepped down, and they have yet to find a replacement to take over that position. So that may not happen until next spring, but that's still on the table for a actually 2 microsites at that end of our neighborhood.
So if I can add a little more background, there is a city, excuse me, a county-run site at 100 River Avenue, which is currently, that's the old VA center, the old VA clinic. And it currently is in use to provide a place for folks who are homeless to either recover from COVID after being in the hospital or be quarantined. Come June 30th, that site is proposed to be converted to a 75-bed low barrier navigation center, which means that the navigation center is a place where they hope to bring people who have had difficulties transitioning back into housing, to give them the tools and the information and the support necessary to transition. Low barrier means that these are people who will be currently either drug or alcohol dependent. So the concern that the board had about that is to put 75 people in that condition and another 45 people within 100 yards in one site would be problematic. So the city has proposed that the sites that Dwight mentioned down on the corner of Northwest Expressway and Chambers Overpass could be the site for a safe sleep site, and they are looking into that in as well as the other 2 sites. So we're not saying no, we're just saying that wasn't the right place, and city staff agreed with us. So that's where we are on that one. We don't have a final answer there either, but we wanted to bring you up to date. Are there any questions on either?
We are working on a good neighbor agreement for the navigation center.
Yeah, and you'll hear more about that.
Present it to the neighborhood down the road.
Okay, I think that's it. Thank you, everybody. We got a lot in a short period of time, and thank you all for your involvement and interest. Stay tuned.
Thanks, Sean. Thanks, Claire.
Thanks, everybody. Right, I'll get the chat if you haven't.
I'm working on it here.